Hi, welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. I'm Len Edgerly. This is the show for Saturday, July 9th, 2022, and I am recording in Ocean Park, Maine. My guest this week is Bruce Holsinger, whose fourth novel, The Displacements, was published 4 days ago on July 5th, 2022 by Penguin Random House. It is a story set in the near future when the world's first Category 6 hurricane turns Miami into an archipelago. Then it gathers strength across the Gulf of Mexico for a direct hit on Houston. Kirkus Reviews has called the novel brilliantly imagined and terrifyingly believable, and predicts that it, quote, seems destined to be a blockbuster. Publishers Weekly writes, Holsinger does a good job exploring the country's cultural and economic divisions and the effects of climate change, and it is even better with the characters and their ever-mounting problems. This story of displacement and desperation packs a wallop. A less flattering take on the book was published by the New York Times, which sniffed that, quote, by the end, the narrative seems canned, and the reviewer took issue with, quote, its suffocating eventfulness. Well, what that reviewer dismisses as eventfulness, others, including me, will find unputdownable in its suspense and the fast-moving nature of the story. And I'll have more to say about my take on the book after the interview. Bruce Holsinger has taught in the Department of English at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville since 2005. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, and his nonfiction books have received major awards from the Modern Language Association, the Medieval Academy of America, and the American Musicological Society. His first two novels were historical fiction set in 14th century London. In 2019, he published The Gifted School, which was an inspection of privilege, race, and class among parents seeking to get their children into a very competitive public school in a town that's loosely based on Boulder, Colorado, where Bruce taught for quite a number of years ago. I reached Bruce yesterday by Zoom in Virginia. He was connecting by his smartphone from his car, and so the audio wobbled a bit. Where the internet was particularly uncooperative, I did some editing to tighten it up. The interview was arranged by Kristen Ilardi, Director of Satellite Media at Penguin USA. Here is our conversation.
You've reached me in somewhere between Charlottesville and Manassas. I'm actually on the road today.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I'm driving up to Dulles Airport.
Oh, okay. So you won't be showing video. I only use audio for the podcast, but it's fine.
Well, if you know, I'm just sitting in a car. I could use video. Yeah. Does that? Yeah. Do you think that makes it more smooth? All right, I'll just.
Cool. Yeah, good.
Hold on one sec. There we go. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. So do you do an official start, something like that, and then we talk?
I'll record a intro on your background and stuff when I put the show together tonight, so we can just jump in. And have you got a half hour?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Great. Well, let's just start. Your new book, published a couple of days ago, The Displacements. What is it about?
Well, it follows the members of a family, of seemingly very affluent family, that living in the coast of southern Florida in the aftermath of what I imagine in the book is the world's first Category 6 hurricane. And the novel takes them through their evacuation, through hook and crook. They end up in a very large mega shelter for displaced persons in Oklahoma, along with millions of others who have been displaced. Tens of thousands end up in these mega shelters scattered in various places throughout the American South. So the novel thinks about climate displacement, socioeconomic displacement. It's very much about downward mobility, but it's also a family drama. I hope a suspenseful family drama, that follows these people as they go through these experiences. The characters that I tell the story from the point of view of the mother, whose name is Daphne, her stepson, Gavin, who had to drop out of Stanford for reasons that you learn as the book goes on, her daughter, Mia, and then a number of others, including a woman named Rain, who's the FEMA official in charge of the mega shelter where they end up in Oklahoma. So the book thinks about climate change, about climate disaster, but it's not an apocalyptic book. It's not dystopian. It could be set next month. It could be set a year from now, a few years from now. And it's also very much about resilience and how people bounce back and learn to cope with major changes in their lives.
That's great. I think we'll do better. Let's both turn our video off. It's a little bit shaky on the audio. And
oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We'll give our. Let's see. How am I going to do
this? Hold on a second.
Turn video settings. Oh, stop video. That's easy. Okay, so I just stopped the video. Okay, yeah. And can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep. No problem.
Yeah, that seems a little clear. Your publisher, Penguin Random House, lists the book in the categories of literary fiction and suspense and thriller. And I heard you say in a conversation you had someone that you and your agent and your editor put a lot of thought into thinking, well, exactly what kind of book are we writing this time? And if you could give it a name or a category that just fits like a glove, this particular book, how do you think of it? What kind of a book is it?
That's so interesting. I have no problem with it being called a thriller. It's certainly suspenseful. But I also think it's, in that I thought a lot about my sentences, I think a lot about craft. It's also a literary novel. I teach in my day job, I teach at the University of Virginia in the English department. And so I'm a literary historian by training. So I work a lot, most of my career is in medieval literature. And so those categories don't really mean much in the long history of literature. I've never been a big believer in the distinction between literary fiction and genre fiction, for example. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying I'm happy for people just to call it a novel.
Well, that was an interesting insight that, these categories are 20th century or later.
Oh, yeah.
Is that because bookstores needed categories to tell where to put the books, and that wasn't such a thing in the Middle Ages? I mean, what caused everybody to be so concerned about whether something's a romance novel or this or that instead of, as you say, just a novel?
Yeah, that is actually a really good question. I imagine it's something about the commercialization and explosion of pulp novels. It's also, the category of literary fiction is very much a product of what the literary historian named Mark McGurl. He has this great book called The Program Era, that's about the rise of the MFA program and how that produced a certain way of thinking about literary fiction. And I'm not an MFA. I'm really come at it from almost from the amateur end of things. So for me, again, those categories don't mean an awful lot. Certainly when it comes to my own writing.
Yeah. When I read the book, there was a personal impact on me. I read a lot. I like to think I'm informed about the approaching climate crisis. I mean, it's here. But to have a story that brought me into the story of this family fleeing Miami and ending up in this mega shelter, it just kind of rearranged my inner landscape about this near future. And my wife and I just bought a house on Sanibel Island last year. Probably not the wisest thing if you take the message of this book seriously. And right now I'm sitting on the coast looking out at the ocean. But I could imagine if a lot of people read this book, then when they encounter the op-ed pieces and all of the sort of push and pull on what to do about policy, they've been kind of tenderized, or they've imagined that they've actually lived there, and now makes them make smarter decisions. But what would your hope or aspirations be for a reader or lots of readers having encountered this story, and how they might therefore prepare or be more constructive in what's coming?
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of putting it. I hadn't thought of it that way, that the book would prepare people to think more about policy. So when you do read an op-ed, I think your word was tenderized, which is a gruesome kind of wonderful word for conditioning a reader to think about something. So I kind of like that. But
like with a steak pounder.
I would, yeah, exactly. That's exactly the image that came to mind. You wrap the reader in plastic and pound him with a tenderizer. But but more seriously, one of the reasons that I wrote the book from the perspective of an affluent family, we all know that climate change is affecting people lower on the socioeconomic run, the world's poor, much more drastically, much more, and that'll certainly continue. But huge fires in Florida that burn people, flooding on the Gold Coasts of the world. All of this is coming. Daphne in the book says, this thing is coming for all of us. She's talking about her own environmental art that's imagining catastrophe. It's about complacency. It's about trying to get people thinking about these kinds of agents. And so he's thinking, through the category of these catastrophes in terms of insurance and what it means for people's homeowners policies. And you learn about reinsurance, where these huge international conglomerates are insuring insurance companies in the case of huge catastrophic event, an op-ed piece. So I don't want your listeners to think that this is, all about policy and catastrophe. It's about, it's about a family. It's a family drama. It's about people getting by, and, kids fighting with their mom and, struggles between Daphne and her stepmother. So it's that kind of story. And yet it's set within this really, earth-shattering moment, in the near future.
Yeah. Have you had any attacks on the book from people that just haven't quite accepted the whole climate crisis yet, or do you expect that it's going to be a piñata for people that think you're trying to stir people up over a problem that's been exaggerated?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my reading last night in Charlottesville, my dad was in the audience and he raised his hand and he said, "Bruce, do you think your book's going to be banned in Florida?" and, I don't think so. There's a lot of people who have written on the climate crisis, and I don't think that, the meteorologists I talked to, the hurricane experts rather, they, if anything, I was stunned by how much worse things could be than what I thought initially. And so I don't think there's no controversy among anyone who will really sit down with this novel, I would imagine.
Yeah.
There's no scientific controversy, no real controversy.
Now FEMA plays a big role in the story because they're running this mega shelter in Oklahoma, Thule Farm. And it sounds like you did a fair amount of research with FEMA. I have a friend who retired from FEMA a few years ago. She was just here having supper with us last night. I was talking to her about the book, and she asked, did my former compatriots of FEMA cooperate with this guy writing his book, or what was the nature of the? And I'm curious about that as well. How did you approach FEMA to get help with getting the facts right, and what was your experience working with them?
Well, I didn't work with FEMA at all. I read an enormous number of FEMA documents and policy statements. I did work with and do a lot of interviewing with disaster relief specialists, one of whom had formerly been with FEMA. But, one of the reasons I did approach FEMA, I put in some, put out some feelers, but it was I was doing all the research during the Trump administration, and there was something I felt a little queasy. And so I did a lot of the research on my own. But, I had a disaster relief specialist, someone who's worked extensively in large refugee camps, vetted for accuracy, give me little ideas. One of the ideas she gave me was about how to imagine that many people being fed, 3 times a day. And so those meals ready to eat MREs that came from Scandinavia, that was a detail I got from her. And those are important details to get right, because, you're writing about, you're writing about a displaced population. So you want to think accurately about what even though it's a fictional one, purely from my imagination, you want to make sure you're doing it right. My first two novels were historical novels set in the late Middle Ages. And I would say that the research that I did for this novel was in fact more difficult than for those novels. For one thing, because those are set in the period that I studied. Yeah. So I kind of knew how to do good research pretty quickly, but also just because of the complexity, the number of moving parts in this novel.
Right. Yeah, I was intrigued to see that you wrote those two, your first two novels are set in 14th century England, and,
yes.
and your 2019 novel, The Gifted School, that sounded like it was kind of in the current environment.
Yes.
The school in Boulder. And now you've leaped ahead. There was one reference that made me think it's roughly set about 2025. So, in the near future.
Very near future, yeah.
How near, we'll find out. When you write a book, a historic novel, you're not going to be kind of caught up with by events that show, your novel was imagined poorly because of this or that. This is the first time you sort of put yourself on the line with a story that as we get into the near future, it's going to be lionized as prophetic, or possibly it's going to be either too dire or not dire enough, depending on what actually occurs. But do you have a sense of what role the future is going to play in the reception of your book?
Well, I mean, the dream is that people will keep reading it, right? That it gets any reception at all. That's the worst part, is to be completely forgotten.
Right.
But, I hope it's not prophetic. I hope that there's not, because the thing about a hurricane like this, you just never know. Because every season people are holding their breath.
Yeah.
But, most seasons have gone by without a catastrophic hurricane in southern Florida. So, who knows? It could be in 2 months, it could be in 10 years. But so you don't want your novel to be seen as a script for something. I had this experience though with The Gifted School, because the advanced proofs were circulating around right when the college admissions scandal broke.
Right.
So the novel there were all these pieces about the novel being the book that predicted the college admissions scandal.
Yeah.
It was definitely good for publicity, and I didn't want there to be an event that was good for publicity for this novel, obviously.
No, that's right.
So that was not then. In fact, I even fought with my editor a little bit about when it would be released. I was hoping it would come out, during the winter or something like that.
Oh, so that it wouldn't be in hurricane season? Or?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I see you're going to be at the Miami Book Fair in the tail end of hurricane season in November. That'll be when your father's question will be relevant. Do you have any qualms or hopes for talking about your book right there at ground zero of your story?
I haven't even thought about it yet. I guess I'm a little trepidatious, but I am going to St. Petersburg in a couple of weeks. St. Pete's, Florida. So we'll see how it plays there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in my conversation with my friend that worked at FEMA, she was talking about someone else that had worked with her, and they had all been working on climate for decades. I was kind of embarrassed just to see, I read this great book about climate, and she said, I've been studying this for decades.
Yes.
And her friend, who was equally tuned in, has 3 months of water and food at his house because he reasons that if the grid goes down, he's not going to be able to just go to Hannaford's, the local supermarket here, and get food, perhaps for a long period of time. And I wonder if you, in the writing of this, or people that you've spoken with about the book, did it leave you with doing something that tangible to help your family get through something that looks a little bit like what's in the book?
It didn't. Sadly, I'm never a very good preparer for things. But I will say that, there's this creek across the street from our house that obsesses me now, because we live in this part of Charlottesville, we're kind of down almost in a gully. And I just look at that creek and just think about it. And so I should be doing more. I really should, but I just haven't. It's a great question, though, and maybe this novel can, help people think about that. Get your go bag ready. Get, be prepared for things. You don't have to be a crazy conspiracy theory prepper to be prepared for something like this.
Well, yeah, I that was another thing in the book that because we're planning to be in Sanibel starting in November and then into the spring, so we could conceivably be down there during a hurricane.
Yeah.
And the story in there, let's see, there's a character, Kiana Robertson's family, and she had her mother had been at the Superdome for Katrina. So she's traumatized by this, and every time there was a hurricane, she would evacuate her family, and they did it 5 times before this storm came. And as a result, she gets to sort of, close out the money in the bank accounts and get everything ready and rent a U-Haul and calmly drive up 95, getting gas along the way. And then
because they were some of the first people who evacuated from Florida.
Right. And Daphne's family got caught, in just the middle of it, and the cars are stranded on the highway, and so it left me thinking that as if I'm down there and there's a storm coming from the coast of Gambia, and even before maybe they've said everybody should evacuate, it might make a lot of sense to be one of the first people out rather than right there at the middle.
Yeah. It's, and that's part of how the novel creates suspense, where Daphne's family is, the hurricane takes this wobble and its cone changes, just a couple days before, and people aren't really heeding the warnings. The governor doesn't give the evacuation early enough. And so, a lot of people just get really caught up in this thing. And so that's, as a way of trying to, show how it affected different people and different families. So, in that section that you were talking about, the Kiana Robertson section, that comes in the middle of it's an experiment I do in the novel, kind of a formal quirk, where I imagine this project called the Great Displacement, a digital chronicle of the lunar migration, and it's you see little fragments of it throughout the novel presented in the form of screenshots from this website. And so hers is one of the testimonials you read. The project is, the way I imagine it in the Displacements is it's done, somebody does it as a dissertation project, several years after the storm. And so they're collecting all these testimonials from people. So almost in the kind of like an oral history. If you think of novels like Daisy Jones and the Six or something like that, where you're getting this retrospective account from different people. And that's only a bit of the novel, but I wanted to do that so you could see the much larger landscape on which this one family's drama plays out.
Yeah, that was really effective, and it was so well done. I was reading the advanced reader copy on my tablet, and I tried clicking on the play button to the audio, hoping that I would hear the voices. Yeah. But that was it kind of reminded me of what was it, the WPA Writers Project, the Voices of the Depression, and
well, it's like Studs Terkel, and also oral testimonials from Chernobyl, other disasters. I did a lot of reading around in those to try to get the idiom of that.
Huh, interesting. Well, given that you teach medieval literature, I wondered if when you wear your novelist hat, do you resonate with anybody that you have studied in the Middle Ages in terms of an author that's written books the way you like to write them, or books that have had the kind of impact that maybe this book might have?
Not so much from the Middle Ages. I mean, I think of that in a very different way than I do the novel. But I suppose, I grew up reading a lot of Charles Dickens, and I think I read all of Dickens by the time I finished college. And I've always been really drawn to novels with multiple points of view, with many characters, with a lot of non-human characters, like the hurricane in my book, Hurricane Luna. And she is very much a character. I try to avoid imputing emotions to an object, but she's, you get her point of view at certain points, and just in these very short chapters.
It's clear I should have taken your course. The novel didn't appear until well after the Middle Ages, right?
Exactly.
1700s or
well, some people would say the 1600s, like with Beware the Cat and these early modern novels. But I think most people would say more like the 18th century, 17th, 18th century.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, since you mentioned Fort Myers, I did a search for Sanibel to see if you'd wiped Sanibel off the face of the map in the story, since I'm now a homeowner down there. But
Right.
if the eye of the storm is approaching Fort Myers and then it stalls, do the barrier islands like Sanibel just kind of disappear based on what you learned about the effect of a storm like that?
I would imagine so, but you never know. Really, so much of what happens to things like islands, and for Miami Beach is a couple of islands, becomes many more islands at the end of this novel, or at the beginning of the novel. But so much of that depends on storm surge, and as these the hurricane experts I interviewed told me, storm surge can act in wildly different ways depending where you are on the coast, where the winds are coming from, which direction, if the hurricane is clockwise or counterclockwise. So, it all just depends so much. So you can't really predict.
You mentioned a little earlier resilience, and I think Gavin has some kind of hopeful things to say about the resilience that is evident at the camp. Are you optimistic that humans, Americans, people from around the world, as this becomes real, that the resilience will carry us through? And there's another point where somebody says, it's very optimistic to say when historians write about this. It's more if historians have a chance to write about this. Are we going to survive this one? You're kind of an optimist, maybe.
I think I am, but I'm very aware that we in your question is a very diverse global we. Mm-hmm. There's not just, we're all one human civilization, but we are so fragmented, and so fragmented in our response to tragedies and mass death. I mean, look at the last few years with COVID. Are we resilient? We're certainly not past COVID in any way. And the ways that our society, our country couldn't deal with it, continues not to deal with it. And the way so many people react selfishly, but then other people react with courage and with care. So if anything, optimism would be the wrong word, but it's more that I think we're going to have, a million different responses, a million different outcomes, depending on where you live, how much money you have, when you're living, how you organize your life. It'll be so fragmented and scattered, and so if there are historians around to write the history of it, that history certainly won't be ending anytime in the next several centuries. So, it's a dire way to think about it, but I think it's accurate.
Mm-hmm. Can you say anything about your next writing project? Have you begun work on it?
Yeah, I've begun work on a few different things. I'm a little superstitious, and I'm not optimistic in that part about it. So I always kind of keep cards close to the chest. But I'm always writing things that involve complicated human relationships. I'm certainly writing another contemporary novel, not a historical.
I see.
Will be my next one, absolutely.
And I saw somewhere in reading about you that there's work on a TV series based on The Gifted School. What's the latest on that, if there's any timing on when it might be on the TV?
Oh, there's no timing. Both of my most recent novels have been optioned, but, a lot of novels get optioned. Very few get made into anything.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Fingers crossed. No new news.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, anything else you'd like to mention about the book that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so. No, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about it. It really has. I appreciate all the questions.
Well, I've enjoyed it too, and I'm recommending the book to everybody. And
wonderful.
It'll be fun to look back, and I have a feeling that it's I've seen people say it's going to be a bestseller. It's easy to imagine that, and the timing of it. I don't know. I think it's an important book, and it's something I know. I asked Kristen if you could recommend some other climate novels that you admire, that if people hear our conversation, they want to kind of go deeper. What are some other books that would be thinking about?
Oh, absolutely. And I should say that while I was writing the novel, I was really careful and didn't read any other climate-related novels. Just so, I didn't want to get influenced. And I would also say that, people talk about climate fiction, But I think, Lydia Millet made this really wonderful argument a couple of years ago when her wonderful book, The Children's Bible, came out, that, don't call it a genre. It's no longer a genre. It is what it is. It's the condition of our present. And so more and more plain old novels are deeply interested in the climate. Right. And of those, I would say that there's a number of them, a couple of novels that have come out in the last year or so, Matt Bell's Appleseed and Sequoia Nagamatsu's How High We Go in the Dark. These novels that just stretch across centuries in this really wonderful way and imagine pasts and futures and both pretty dark but also hopeful, I think. And then another one that is just staggering is Imbolo Mbue's How Beautiful We Were. It's set in a fictional African village and just thinks about environmental devastation and climate change through the lens of these different villagers over several generations. And I already mentioned Lydia Millet, The Children's Bible, and then Amitav Ghosh, of course, Gun Island, which is, I think, just a masterpiece, an absolutely dazzling novel. So those are just a few that I would name. They're novels that I didn't let myself read until very recently, until the novel was in editing. And now I'm just very excited to read more and also to teach these novels to my students. Yeah. So I've been putting them in everybody's hands.
That's admirable restraint. And now you've rewarded yourself with some good reading afterward.
Exactly.
Great. I have been speaking with Bruce Holsinger, author of The Displacements, his fourth novel, which was published this week on July 5th by Penguin Random House. Thanks very much, Bruce.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, that was good. And we had a little wobble in the audio, but I think I'll be able to clean that up in the editing. So we got 98% of it, and it was all good.
If you need if you need to follow up at all, I'm around. So
okay. Yeah, I'll reach out to Kristen, but I think we're
okay.
Good. All right, take care.
Great. All right, Great to talk to you. Thanks so much. All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Bruce Holsinger. A couple of things I'd like to comment on. At one point when he talks about, he says the book thinks about climate change disaster. And I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody talk about a book thinking about a topic. But I like it. I think that's what a good book, fiction or nonfiction, does feel like. It thinks about a subject in depth, and it's a shared investigation with an active reader. I'll also say that this book really did change how I think about or maybe feel about the topic of climate disaster. I think it might lead me to be ready to sell our new home in Sanibel sooner rather than later. When we bought it last year, I put a note in my calendar, I think maybe 4 years out, just to say how imminent is some kind of a climate event based on what we see on the neighboring island Captiva and other things. Because if the real estate market crashes because people all of a sudden have a concern about it, I'd just soon be one of the earlier people out than when everything happens all at once. And the other thing is it will certainly leave us ready to evacuate Sanibel at the first sign of a hurricane forming as a threat to South Florida. And one advantage we have is that where we are on the island is very close to the causeway, which heads back to Fort Myers. There's some places like on Captiva, you could spend an hour on a good day trying to get off the island, and that obviously would be a pretty tough thing if everybody was trying to flee the island in the face of a disaster. Bruce describes himself as an amateur author as opposed to a card-carrying Master of Fine Arts or MFA holder, and I think that's an advantage in his writing of this book. It doesn't feel like a polemic to me, in which the story is secondary to the author's desire to change people's minds in a specific way. I think here the story is primary in the characters, and its effect is, in my opinion, more personal. In reading the book and talking about it with our friend Holly, who happened to be here the other night and who retired from FEMA a number of years ago, I realized how difficult it seems to be to take climate disaster seriously and prepare for it, and at the same time lead a sane and balanced life. It almost seems like there are only two realities. You can just be obsessed with what's coming and cry the alarm and try to get everybody to realize it, or you can ignore it and go about your life. And I don't think either one of those is a very good fit with the reality that we're in. So it's this very challenging balancing act of accepting what's coming. The science is just, unanimously understood how serious the situation is with climate, and enjoying grandchildren, having a good summer at the beach, and doing the things which make life worth living. And I think for me, the reading of this book and entering into what it would be like to actually live in a mega shelter like the one he describes, it helps me to prepare for what might be coming, not as a political statement, because, I'm of one party that's more aware than another party. It's personal. Having had the experience of living this story in the book, I think it helps me to have that kind of a balance between taking the threat seriously and continuing to have a sane life. So that's kind of where we come out. And when I realized that hurricane season is officially designated as lasting through November, that I kind of thought that we had it set up that our Sanibel time was going to be before and after hurricane season. But November turns out to be a month where we plan to be down there the whole month, and that could be the last hurricane of the season, which could be the big one. Who knows? Bruce might sound apologetic for writing thrillers, but I don't think he needs to be, especially on this topic. What's thrilling is that the story barrels along with characters I cared about and events that shocked and were at the same time believable. And I think the effect of that suspense and the thriller part of it is to embed the reality of climate change disruption at a deeper level than, even the best op-ed or a talking head on the cable news. So I hope this book does become a bestseller. I hope it's read for a long time. I hope other people have a chance to have the same kind of rebooting of how they look at this topic by reading a really well done, highly drawn fiction about it. In other news, today we had a new addition to the family arrive. UPS, just a little past noon, I think, delivered an Amazon home robot, Astro. Garrett Riley, a long-time friend of the podcast, received an invitation to buy Astro, and he kindly ordered it for me, and I reimbursed him for it. So I have no idea how Astro is going to improve life here at the cottage. I know I won't be taking him for a walk on the beach at low tide or rolling to the soda fountain in Ocean Park, but it's going to be a lot of fun to get to know him. I plan to put an unboxing video up. I haven't done one of those in a long time. I filmed the UPS truck arriving and the box coming on the shelf and on the porch, and then the very simple taking him out of the box. It was just a two-step process. I found the charging stand. I plugged it in. I backed Astro up into it, and then the screen asked for the Wi-Fi name and the password and my Amazon password, and then there were some videos that came up to describing what happens next. I think I have to watch all the videos before I can actually ask Astro to come to me and Watson, come here. And Sophie, our little dog, I was sort of teasing her and saying, well, Sophie, your time as an only child is coming to an end. You've got a new brother arriving. And she sat up on the couch where she usually sits. And when I asked her what she thought of Astro, I don't think I imagined it, but a very disdainful look, as if, are you kidding me? You're going to replace me or edge my spot in the family out by something you just pulled out of a box. So we'll see. When Astro is actually moving around and doing things, I'll be curious to see if Sophie barks at him like an intruder or accepts him as the newest member of the family. In any event, thank you, Garrett. You have opened up a whole new adventure for us. The other thing that happened, and it'll be in the unboxing video, my sister, who was next door in the next cottage, I asked her if she'd like to come over for the the unboxing. And so she's sitting there, and I'm going on and on about, oh, here's Astro is coming out. And she said, I've seen this before. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when you got your first tape recorder, the reel-to-reel tape recorder, and you pulled it out of the box, and you said all the things you were going to do with it and all this. And it all of a sudden did flash on me, all the toys or the events or gadgets that have come in to my life starting from quite young. And I think if you had a video of my opening up that tape recorder and then played it against this unboxing video of opening up Astro, that it would be 100% the same energy. I feel like a kid when I'm in the presence of something like this, which is so exciting and so fun. And so that place of childhood wonder and excitement, I'm grateful it's still alive, and that I have the opportunities to try the next thing. The items are a little more expensive, a little more complex, but at their heart, they tickle the same place in my mind and my heart, and I'm really looking forward to see where that takes with our newest member of the family, Astro. Next interview will be, I think, in about a week with Dean Koontz, so that'll be up in July, and I'm not sure what's coming after that, but really it's terrific to have a chance to talk to these authors, and I've spoken with Dean Koontz a number of times before, and he's always good to talk with, so that's coming our way, and I'm looking forward to it. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in Ocean Park, Maine. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day.